Welcome to Football Today Team Profile and Projection. Today we are looking at who are we? The Commanders, the Washington Commanders. They came in our power rankings at 29th after a 4-13 season. They were 25th in scoring last year, 18th in passing, 27th in rushing. Defensively, dead last, 32nd in points per game, 32nd in passing yards, 27th in rushing yards. They get rid of Ron Rivera. Dan Quinn comes in his first season. He's been the Cowboys DC for years after being fired by the Falcons as the head coach. Offensive coordinator, they bring in Cliff Kingsbury, his first season back in the NFL after being fired by the Cardinals, worked at USC last year. And then defensive coordinator is Joe Witt Jr., who's, been Quinn's passing game coordinator with the Cowboys and Falcons since 2020. This team last year was the most undisciplined defense in the NFL. So undisciplined, where it was just like this team is so easy to take advantage of when you're facing their defense.
You want to get right game, play the Washington Commanders.
And when I think of Dan Quinn, I remember that 2020 Cowboys defense, right? And it was another team. It wasn't as bad as last year's Commanders, where they were undisciplined. They were the team you ran trick plays against. You were the team that you ran outside runs against because they didn't play their gaps. And Quinn came in and cleaned that up immediately and turned that defense around quickly. And this defense outside the cornerback room is molded in Dan Quinn's image of like Dan Quinn type players. He just doesn't have the great players that he had in Dallas outside of the interior defensive line. So, we'll talk about, they drafted Jayden Daniels second overall, everything. But that's the thing I'm looking for is like, what does Dan Quinn do with this defense that's semi-talented, has some vets, and again, was the most undisciplined unit in the NFL last season.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a great point. The Commanders, I'll look at it from a little bit of a big picture to start. Commanders are in a very, very interesting position as a franchise where they drafted what I believe could be a really good modern day NFL quarterback in Jayden Daniels. Adam Peters, they hired Adam Peters, who has been seen as a young up-and-coming assistant GM with the 49ers since 2021. He's been with that organization since 2017. It feels like, hey, if you want to be somewhat successful in the NFL, hey, take somebody from that Shanahan tree and pick off of him and see what you get. And even with what feels like a solid offseason, Bobby, ton of free agency signings, 6 top 100 picks where most of them I like. I think they really, in a vacuum, kind of crushed this offseason. But I just can't help by feeling troubled by the Dan Quinn hire as head coach. I don't think that's being talked about enough. No doubt he could come in and help fix bring some discipline to a defense. And also, no doubt, this is a positive for Dan Quinn. There are players like Jonathan Allen. Like Jonathan Allen has been very vocal about not being happy with the direction of the franchise. And a lot of it had to do with, asshole Dan Snyder as owner too. Jonathan Allen's been here for a long time, not happy with things. And now bringing in Dan Quinn, where a guy like Micah Parsons has raved about him. All the players in Dallas have raved about Dan Quinn. And they are so excited to see him get this opportunity. So that's the good thing, that the players are on his side. And for 2024, everybody's going to be on his side. But Dan Quinn as a defensive coordinator, I feel very differently about Dan Quinn as a head coach. And even Dan Quinn with the defense, you mentioned it, but it is a real thing that this defense, even with good players kind of built in Dan Quinn's little image, it's not littered with all pros like it was in Dallas.
Well, here's the biggest worry for Washington this year is that two position groups that can get you, destroy you on both sides of the ball is offensive line and your DB room. And they're awful, right? Their cornerback situation is awful. Their offensive line, I know people will try and talk themselves into it a little bit of, it's improved, but I don't have any faith that this offensive line is going to be good. And they hired Bobby Johnson as the offensive line coach, who just coached the Giants, who gave the second most sacks in NFL history.
We know from
Neal
personal
has been a bust under him. No one's really progressed.
No, guys have gotten worse.
Yeah, guys have gotten worse, or just have not progressed as young players. So I just think those are the two things holding the Commanders fully back, as from being like a team that can be a little more fun or win 8 games or whatever, right? Like no one expects this team to be a playoff contender, but you do look at some of this roster and like, okay, that could be good. You have a young quarterback in Jayden Daniels, like you said, who can kill you in the air and on the ground. Um, you see some noticeable names, but it's those two units that to me are going to be the downfall of the 2024 Commanders. And I'm not expecting them to come in and fix everything right away, but for this year, I think it's going to be really painful.
No, and that's why I feel like it's important to talk about the Commanders right now from this 1,000-foot view instead of just looking at what they may be in 2024. Because really, I know you may not want to talk about a lot about this, but I'm just so locked into the staff that they have right now because they offered Mike McDonald the job. They brought him in for 2 interviews, and then the third conversation would have been basically a formality to his hiring. They didn't get to that third meeting. Seattle hired him. Ben Johnson, who after reading a long article from the Athletic, Diana Rossini and somebody else, Ben Johnson conducted himself like an asshole, straight up asshole, where they let it, they're flying in the air. Adam Peters and Washington and company, they're flying in the air to Detroit. Ben Johnson lets them know while they're in the air, hey, not coming. Sorry. I'm not interested in, you guys maybe, he talked about how this is too much of a basketball ownership. I don't know if they're headed in the right direction. All right. So, Ben Johnson wasn't interested in that. So really, it's not the Commanders' fault of their process. They wanted 2 other guys that I kind of liked more than Dan Quinn, and Dan Quinn is seen as like the retread. All right, we're going to do it again, head coach. So it's not their fault, but it doesn't change the fact that I think that they hired a head coach that is kind of a sitting duck, and I think within 3 years, Dan Quinn is gone.
Well, I don't think it's because he's sitting duck. I just don't think Dan Quinn is. I don't think like people will bring up. Oh, he went to the Super Bowl. That was Kyle Shanahan's offense that got them to the Super Bowl.
Right.
Like those defenses were not very good in Atlanta, and it ended horribly. So I don't think Dan Quinn is going to be a good head coach. And I don't like the hire of Cliff Kingsbury, but I think it's because of the Commanders kind of got screwed in this situation because you said the other coaches, but I don't think they viewed him as like, okay, we got to hire someone, and then he's a sitting duck. I think he's a sitting duck because I don't think he's a great head coach, and this, like you said, the corner back and offensive line is a huge question mark.
That's fair.
So, but let's talk about the offense, right? Cliff Kingsbury takes over as offensive coordinator. This team gave up the second most sacks in the NFL last year. A good amount of that was Sam Howell's doing. He had the second most QB allowed sacks, but still was a really bad offensive line. And I went back and I looked at Kyler Murray's rookie year because Jayden Daniels is going to be rookie. Kyler Murray was the most sacked QB in the NFL as a rookie with Cliff Kingsbury, and this is where the question is going to be with Jayden Daniels, right? Early on, you've got this Jayden Daniels who won the Heisman, created a ton of big plays in the air with his legs, but he goes from being kept clean, like just never being touched in the pocket all the time in the world, and having elite weapons, right? 2 first-round pick wide receivers, maybe someone that can go in the first round the next year, a good tight end. And he's going to go and have a bad offensive line, but good weapons. He's going to have good, at least solid weapons. That's the question: is what does Jayden Daniels look like in the NFL? And I have worries, right? There was a lot of Jayden Daniels' issues were covered up by his legs, right? There's multiple times where like you're watching the film, the pre-draft on him, and you're like, the dig's wide open. It's part of the progression. Why doesn't he throw this? Or why doesn't he throw this? And then he would take off and run for 60, 70 yards. So I think the legs are going to give Jayden Daniels a nice floor to learn through some rookie issues, but he's going to have to progress as a passer, right? Like the comparison has been made to Justin Fields as the guys with the least amount of throws over the middle and the middle intermediate part of the field, coming as first round picks. Like he's blinded in the middle of the field, and he can have all the rushing ability in the world. And you'll be year 3 being like, man, this is the year that Jayden Daniels figures it out. And you could just be stuck with a guy who's an electric rusher, can make really good throws with his arm, but just doesn't operate an offense the way that an offensive coordinator wants.
Yeah. But I honestly think he can operate the offense that Cliff Kingsbury wants. Because we know how much Cliff Kingsbury likes to go to the sideline. DeAndre Hopkins is, get Terry McLaurin, get ready to run an out route, buddy, because that's what DeAndre Hopkins did for all those years that he was with Arizona as well. So obviously that's not.
And I think he has a high floor as a player, right? Where even if it's bad, I think with Cliff Kingsbury, won't be giving up on him because there's going to be explosive plays in the air and on the ground, and they have good weapons, right? Like Terry McLaurin's been a wide receiver since day one. Since day one, week one of his rookie season, he's been that guy. Like the only year he didn't have 1,000 yards was that rookie season, and he missed 2 games and had 919 yards. So they have a legitimate wide receiver one. Jahan Dotson, his production went down a lot last year. At least in per game usage, had 515 yards for the season. Like I think he's an 800 yard per year type of player. Um, and we'll see what Zach Ertz has left in the tank. We know Kingsbury likes him from his time in Arizona, but um, it's going to be interesting to see how they handle rookie Jayden Daniels, because there's going to be growing pains as a passer. How much do they lean into his legs, and how much does he just
Right.
develop a seat in the middle of the field, or when he does scramble, looking to throw and not just to run every time, and to not take the big hits that he took mostly early in the season for LSU, but they were some of the biggest hits you'll ever see on a quarterback.
Yeah, that's going to be my key for him because he's going to run, and I like that.
They need to lean into his legs.
The most efficient play in the game of football is when a quarterback drops back to pass and then he scrambles, because typically you have major running lanes and it goes for 10, 15, 20 yards. And that happened to Jayden Daniels in college, and it's going to happen in the pros. But I kind of want to challenge is that when he would tuck it to run, it wouldn't be looking to throw. We're tucking to run to run. And I think what will separate him and what will make him that perfect modern day quarterback, at least from the sculpture standpoint, is if you can split, if you can run to your left and you can run to your right and you can throw on the run. You can find Terry McLaurin down the field. You can find Dotson. You can find a tight end that's coming open and improvising and breaking from their route and their route concept, right? That's the type of stuff. If you can practice that and if you can execute it, that's the type of stuff that the unscripted stuff. That's how I feel like you can really, you don't even need to be that great. That's how you can get
that's
by.
how you
That's
get
how
by
you can get
as
by.
you develop, right? Is because like you
Yes.
said, you're not going to be. He's going to have some crazy 60-yard runs. That's going to happen, right? And he should run a lot, but when he needs to look to throw, he needs to. That is how your legs are the most valuable.
Yeah.
Right. That is how Lamar Jackson runs a lot, but when he scrambles, he looks to throw first,
Yeah.
and then unless it's just a clear, wide open lane for him to go. So that
Yeah. That's also how you become more dangerous, where teams will have to play that. Teams will have to respect that instead of just you running, you bring the option of you throwing in there. You take guys out of the box, and then it opens up stuff underneath, and it gets easier.
It makes it very frustrating for a defensive coach when you have that, and his ability to run is, let's go. What quarterbacks in the NFL are going to be better runners from him day one? Lamar Jackson. I would say Justin Fields is probably number 2. Josh Allen, and then Jayden Daniels.
Yeah.
Or Jalen Hurts could be in there, but that's a little more short yardage between the tackles.
And it's more design stuff. Yeah, he doesn't really scramble.
But he does, get a lot of, yards running QB power, but they might want to lean away from that because the injury happened. But anyways, the offensive line is obviously the biggest warrior on this offense, right? Charles Leno Jr. is gone. Who's going to be at left tackle, right? Is it going to be Brandon Coleman out of, TCU, a 3rd round pick? Andrew Wiley's been disappointing at right tackle for them. You added Tyler Biadasz and Nick Allegretti
I don't love
to go
him.
with Sam Cosmi, but to me, those are 2 names, right? Biadasz is an upgrade for what they had at center last year. Allegretti, we'll see, but it's a very uninspiring offensive line. Like, you have Sam Cosmi, he's a nice piece, and I think you're worrying about the other 4 guys.
I like Sam Cosmi a lot. I am looking right now because I think he's going to be a free agent next year, and that's a guy that I have circled as like I want my favorite team to go and sign Sam Cosmi, which is true. 2024, he is final year of his rookie deal, so that's a guy that I hope that they go out there and re-sign and they extend for them. Yeah, I don't like Tyler Biadasz. Who I want to see like Ricky Stromberg get some play and get some run, but he's not that's probably not going to happen. Yeah, this line's a concern, man.
With the running backs, they added Austin Eckler. You have Brian Robinson Jr., who's been a starter for them for 2 years now. Chris Rodriguez, quite the thing that we talked about. I like him, right? Like I've said kind of half kiddingly that I think Chris Rodriguez Jr. is better than Brian Robinson. They ran the ball the least in the NFL last year with Eric Bieniemy, right? When they should have leaned on it way more. Right, like Bieniemy was the ultimate. Like, fuck it, let's just someone's down there. They take sacks and made big plays. Here's where that's where I expect him to improve the most offensively. One, Jayden Daniels, the element that he brings. But Cliff Kingsbury, I thought that's where he was his best in Arizona, was scheming the run, right? That's where I thought his creativity really shone off a little more in the passing game was in the running game. And the Cardinals were top 10 in rushing his first 3 years in Arizona. Obviously, Kyler Murray's rushing, yards account for that. But guess what? They got someone who can, who's going to be one of the best running quarterbacks day one. So I think this needs to be a team that runs zone reads, RPOs, and has, like you said, Terry McLaurin, quick throws, and then looking to scheme up big plays at the right time.
Do we think Austin Eckler has anything left?
Yeah, they're not. I mean, they're not going to make him be the, like, who do you think gets the most carries?
I think it's going to wind up being Brian Robinson.
I do too, but I think they're going to try and use Austin Eckler in different ways. But I
3.5 yards per attempt last year. Austin Eckler.
It was bad all around, and
he was checked out. Like he was clear that he was checked out. He wanted to be paid. He wasn't getting paid enough. Going on the podcast, blah blah blah, and saying all that stuff. He was checked out, and maybe that plays a part in it. But man, it just was not good. Yards before contact was really really bad too. I don't know if that's a referendum on the offensive line or if he's just running into contact earlier. His yards after contact wasn't great. It was the worst of his career, but that's been going down since 2021. I don't love Brian Robinson. He actually had some better advanced numbers than I thought last year, stemming from last year with rushing yards over expected. But even just from health-wise, Austin Eckler sometimes gets hurt, and Brian Robinson's been pretty reliable. I think Brian Robinson is going to get more carries.
Yeah, I do too. Even if Austin Eckler could technically get more snaps, I think Brian Robinson's going to get the bulk load of the carries. Defensively, This is my expectation for them. Dan Quinn and Bobby Wagner, they're going to get these guys in the right place, and they're going to play fast. They may give up a ton of yards and big passing games, but they're going to blitz. They're going to play cover 1 and cover 3, and they are going to attack you up front. And honestly, I think that's what they should do with the personnel that they have. And obviously, a lot of that personnel was brought in by Dan Quinn. But here's my challenge to that team would be Daron Payne, bounce back. Right? His pass rush win rate was the worst of his career in 2019. He had just absolutely awful games. That should not happen.
He can be an elite
Jonathan
player.
Allen needs to go from good back to dominant. Right? A couple years ago, he was a top 3 to 5 defensive tackle in the NFL. Get back to that group. And then if Johnny Newton stays healthy, that's a hell of a 3 on the interior. Those are 3 guys that can do fucking damage and really frustrate an offense up front. And if those guys are do what they are capable of, it's going to make Dorrance Armstrong and Dante Fowler better on the outside. It's going to make it easier for Bobby Wagner. Frankie Louvu at linebacker, arguably the best pass rushing linebacker in the NFL. He has 14 sacks the last 2 years. Wagner's going to get him playing fast. We'll talk about the corners in a second, but speaking of that front 7, they just need to go play fast, be in the right place, and do it as fast as you can. They should be attack type of defense.
And 2 guys that I've loved from the draft, previously the last couple years. There's NFL people that are talking about Fedarian Mathis and John Ridgeway. John Ridgeway from Dallas went to Arkansas. Fedarian Mathis was the 2nd-round pick from 2022 that went to Alabama. There's NFL people floating around that those 2 guys may need to be traded because the Commanders shouldn't cut them because they're so stacked in interior defensive line. Fedarian Mathis is their second, if Johnny Newton's healthy, Fedarian Mathis is their number 4 interior defensive lineman. 2nd-round pick from 2022.
And he hasn't lived up to his expectations, but there's games where he looks really freaking good. Right? So, they just need to lean into those guys. That has to be the challenge. It's you 3, you guys need to be dominant. You guys have to be what leads us to wins. And then again, you have Dorrance Armstrong and Dante Fowler who come over from Dallas. Now they become starters compared to backups. Both those guys were good in that role. It'll be interesting to see how good they are in starter roles here.
You're going to have interior defensive linemen that can help you stop the run. And the challenge is to limit the explosive play, limit the average depth of target. Don't force them to throw it deep. Force them to get rid of the ball quickly. because that's going to be the best way that you're going to be able to help out a secondary that is
And
not
play
very
your
good.
responsibility on run defense, right? They should be a top 10 run defense this year with that front seven. You have Jeremy Chin and Mike Sainristil, who should be really good run defending DBs from day one. They should be a top 10 run defense and look to get sacks and quarterback hits. Because, Justin, this secondary is really bad, right?
Yeah.
Like your starters, you have Benjamin St. Juste, who gave the second most yards in the NFL last year. Emmanuel Forbes is a rookie, gave up the fourth most yards per catch with a 65% completion rate.
Is he even going to start?
You draft Mike Sainristil in the second round, who's a nickel-only cornerback. And then who are you going to play safety opposite Jeremy Chin? Derek Forrest or Percy Butler? Right? Like, I guess you drafted Jatavius Martin in the second round and moved him to nickel. He's going to go back to safety, but he's someone you want down, around the line of scrimmage more than playing. Like, who's going to play deep safety? Because you can't ask Jeremy Chin to be your number one deep safety. And Forrest and Butler have never really done it in the NFL.
I will say Michael Davis is probably going to start opposite of Benjamin St. Juste. If crazy,
There's
Emmanuel
no way
Forbes,
they can give up on Forbes that quickly, can they?
But I think Michael Davis is just better right now, right? In my opinion, it's Michael Davis, and then maybe the question is Emmanuel Forbes versus Benjamin St. Juste. That's my.
Well, let's do X Factor, because my X Factor is Emmanuel Forbes. He had 14 interceptions in college, 6 returned for touchdowns. If he can turn him into a turnover guy, I'm not sitting here saying, "Oh, turn him into Trevon Diggs." Dan Quinn, he was there for Trevon Diggs becoming the guy that he is. Turn him into a guy that's getting turnovers, right? With the way that this defense plays aggressive, get him to play in trail and from inside technique. Really try and get him as a guy who can get his hands on the ball, because he's going to give up yards. The secondary is going to give up yards, but look to create turnovers, and that's something that Dan Quinn did so well in Dallas. Where, the first year in Dallas, they were that great defense. They had so many turnovers, and they were the team like, they're going to regress. You can't rely on turnovers on defense on a year-to-year basis. And then they continued to do it year in and year out. So, I think Diggs and Deron Bland have a combined, 31 interceptions the last 3 seasons, and Bland was only been there for 2 years. So turn Emmanuel Forbes into a turnover guy, and that could be your X factor, because they're gonna give up passing yards. But if they can get after the passer and then get turnovers, that's a defense where we can look at them at the end of the year and be like, look at what they did with that roster.
I'm not ready to talk about my X factor yet, but I will. This will transition me into a big loss that they had. Kyle Fuller's is a bigger loss than what is being given credit for. Now, I think huge get for Miami, and I love that because he was playing at an all-pro level at one point, and then I remember Dalton Feely and we had all JM. If you remember us from back then, we had all JM team episodes, and we talked about Kyle Fuller multiple times. We put Kendall Fuller.
Yeah,
are we sure? Yeah, Kyle Fuller's on the Patriots. Kendall Fuller. Then he goes up against DJ Moore on a Thursday Night Football against the Chicago Bears, and DJ Moore cooks him, and then kind of everything fell off for Washington fully.
And he played
after that.
well outside of that. So yeah, like additions and losses. You get Marcus Mariota, Austin Eckler, Zach Ertz, Dante Fowler, Dorrance Armstrong, Cleveland Farrell, Bobby Wagner, Frankie Louvu, and Jeremy Chin. A lot of age there. You lose Sam Howell, Antonio Gibson, Curtis Samuel, Logan Thomas, Charles Leno Jr., Casey Toohill, Cody Barton, David Mayo, Kendall Fuller, and then Cam Curl. So I mean that's my thing. It's like, why didn't you address the secondary more and free agent? I know that when we look at,
they addressed a lot though. That's the thing, man. They addressed a lot.
The secondary is what's going to get them killed. They had a lot of draft picks.
Yeah, and they had a lot of draft picks, and hey, we're big believers in draft the players that you like. Don't just force positions. This is another team. We've said this about a lot of teams so far in TPPs, where this isn't fully about 2024. This is about beyond. I mean, this is another team with a new GM that he's going to need to put his full footprint on the roster, and he needs more than one off season to do it. But this is my favorite draft class that we've talked about so far in these TPPs.
Yeah, so you get Jayden Daniels in the first round, Johnny Newton in the second round, Mike Sainristil, the one corner they did add in the second round as well. Another second round pick. They got Ben Sinnott, the tight end out of Kansas State.
I have confirmation on that, by the way. It's Sinnott.
That's how you pronounce it. Brandon Coleman in the third round, the tackle. Luke McCaffrey, wide receiver from Rice, brother of Christian. in the third, and then they had a fifth, and a seventh of Jordan McGee, Dominique Hampton, and Javante Jean Baptiste. I'm not familiar with the last three guys.
I'm not familiar
Um,
either. But I love Sinnott.
I
He
think
was one
their
of my
first
favorite
five
tight
picks can
ends.
come in and compete day one. Now, Brandon Coleman may
Yeah, I
be an
agree.
issue because he might be starting for you day one, but I think all five. I think Jayden Daniels is clearly a starter. Sane Russell is clearly a starter. Sinnott can be one if Ertz is not there. Newton would be on any other team. And then
Yeah.
Brandon Coleman might come in and start a tackle. And hey, even Luke McCaffrey
It's
too, right? Like they lost Curtis Samuel. He could come in and compete for playing.
yeah. I mean, we talked about Johnny Newton. Sanders still, just very high in him. Just seems like he's a really good ball player, and he's new to the corner position still, but he's transitioned to it so fast. Just seems to be a football guy, and that's great. But Sinnott has these advanced metrics that you want to see out of tight ends today. He has that 40 time. He has the yak, and I feel like those two times that if you kind of get those metrics kind of in line. Plus, he's a solid blocker, effort blocker. I think obviously you could talk more. Maybe he has to develop more in that, but he's got like those metrics that coincide with some of the successful tight ends in the NFL. He's kind of got that between the yak and the 40. The thumpers are kind of tough to really separate yourselves in today's NFL. Can I get to my
Who's your
X
X
factor?
factor?
Hey, you mentioned Luke McCaffrey. My X factor is Jahan Dotson.
He was my second one that I would have done.
16th overall pick of the 2022 NFL draft. He has averaged 2.9 catches per game in his first 2 years as a pro. 7 interceptions when he was targeted last year, and the team had 21. So that's 33% of the team's total interceptions were going his way last year. Now, I'm not saying that's all his fault. It's Sam Howell who was a little reckless with the ball, right? But really, Jahan Dotson, can he emerge as a reliable number 2 targets for Jayden Daniels? Or is it going to all be on Terry McLaurin and he'll receive the majority of the attention? Like, I
think
actually
Dotson
think
will
that,
too. I think I think he's an 800 yard per year type of guy, but I think he will.
But I'm of the belief that I know Chris Rose is high on Luke McCaffrey, and in NFL circles, they were talking about him high at the combine. They looked really good. But why not I think Jahan Dotson can be strongest in the slot. Year one, he was pretty much on the outside and then low on the inside. But last year, he had a 60-40 outside the slot ratio. I mean, is Luke McCaffrey seriously going to be like the starting slot for this team? I think they could rotate, and I think it's good to have guys that have inside-outside versatility. But my ideal lineup for the Washington Commanders is Terry McLaurin and De'Ami Brown on the outside, and then you put Jahan Dotson in the slot. You're not on De'Ami Brown.
I wish I was.
You're off
But I
on him?
love De'Ami Brown. But Dotson is someone that I think he's someone who does split between outside and the slot, right? Like it reminds me a bit. You remind me a bit coming out of Sterling Shepard, where it's like, hey, he's good on the outside, he's good in the slot, but ideally you have him in the slot and have those two outside wide receivers. But if you don't have that second outside wide receiver, you got to give him some reps on the outside as well. But he should, like you said, he should get a handful of slot reps. So
Yeah, De'Ami Brown's numbers are not.
De'Ami Brown's been really bad. But you have like one random 50-yard touchdown like every 7 weeks.
Yeah.
Over under 6.5 wins.
Dude, I've picked under for every team that we've done so far.
Well, it's our power rankings that we're going off of, so it makes sense.
Somebody's got to win eventually, but you know what? I'll say over.
I have it as under. It's just those O-line and secondary is a huge worry, and I don't think I'm going to expect like elevating success from Jayden Daniels. I think you're going to see really good moments, and I think there's going to be some terrible moments too. And I don't think they have the roster to make up for those terrible moments. So,
no, I'm going under. I'm going under because I literally have said this is the most negative I've really been, and I'm going under. I don't care if I've picked under for every single team so far.
Down
I'm
under.
go under.
All right, that is the Washington Commanders, and this is Football Today.